my name is Keith Meyerson. I'm the cartooning coordinator here at the School of Visual Arts. And I've been teaching here for, oh my gosh, about 16 or 18 years, so long that I've lost count. I know I've lost some hair. You know, when I first started teaching here, I had wonderful classes of mostly guys, mostly from Long Island, doing superhero comics. Nothing wrong with that. I love superhero comics and people from Long Island, and I think, you know, this is, I'm an optimist. You know, I think the glass is half full, and I want to make sure that this is a very optimistic, proactive conversation, not only about, indie comics, but also mainstream comics. And so truly, superhero comics for me are sort of the Wall Street of the comic world. If the superhero comics are doing great, then that keeps the comic book stores that are still open, and also opens opens different shelves for all different kinds of comics, right? So it's all equally important. But in these classes, I would have maybe one long-haired individual doing strange things on piano keys and napkins, which was cool. And then I would have one woman usually in the mix who was like there with the guys and doing her part, and it was just really, really great and wonderful, but there was obviously a gender gap. What's happened really in the last decade, wonderfully, is our classes are now almost always over half women. And with people from all different walks of life, all different creeds, colors, and classes, doing all different kinds of comics. There's a great cornucopia, a plethora of wonderful choices that people are making that aren't merely just the mainstream superhero comics, but everything. And I like to think that it's a wonderful world when you can have everything represented, written and drawn by everyone. And so really, this panel comes from that to be able to talk about that. First I wanted to give a big shout out first to our esteemed panelists for coming here and giving their time and information, intelligence, and talent to this great panel. And we're going to introduce them very soon. Thank you. I also want to give a shout out to Anna Ogier-Bloomer, who really helped along with me in career development to organize all of this. Many emails and organizing and postering. So please give it up for Anna. Thank you so much. Also from career development, Angie Wojak. Right over here, who really put fire under me to actually do this. This has been something I want to do for a while, and she said, let's do it, along with career development. So could you please thank Angie and career development? For those of you who are currently in SVA, and there's a lot of SVA alumni who I'm so happy to see, realize that career development is your friend. As long as you're just 4 years out of SVA, sometimes a little longer, they're always happy to talk to you. Realize that your tuition dollar pays now and also after you graduate for their incredible services. So please let yourself be known by career development. It really is your first stop, your first step into the rest of your life. And so please be friends with these people. Get to know them, have them know you, get your work on our SVA website. So incredibly important. And so please remember career development is your friend. And without them, we wouldn't have had this. Also, this is an event that's co-sponsored by the Museum of Comics and Cartoon Art, which is now part of the Society of Illustrators. And they made it wonderfully part of their Comics and Cartoon Week. And we're so happy to be involved with them. And of course, you know, the MoCA convention happens just up the street here on Lexington in 25th. And it's just like a flying saucer filled with people who love comics as an art form, like we do here. Just great, wonderful, amazing, talented people, famous and soon to be famous, incredible publishers, panels, symposiums. And so I'm hoping this is just whetting your appetite for the MoCA Fest, and you go there this Saturday and Sunday and really enjoy it. I really want to give a shout out to Society of Illustrators. I used to be on the board of MoCA, and so it was a little bittersweet when they became part of Society of Illustrators and don't have their own venue. But truly, I think the MoCA board would agree that it couldn't have a better home than Society of Illustrators. They've done a wonderful, wonderful job, and they have incredible programming all the time. So it's not just about the MoCA Fest weekend. Society of Illustrators always has incredible exhibits, panels, model drawing classes, all kinds of things that are really part of the community. So please let yourself be known to Society of Illustrators. Go to their fancy townhouse on the Upper East Side, but don't feel intimidated. They're friendly people that show incredible work. So a round of applause for Society of Illustrators. Also, I don't know if you've enjoyed this wonderful image of this poster that my student Molly Ostertag did. And it's incredible. We love it. And we guys, please clap Molly. But I wanted to say that really, in many ways, this panel was born out of the class that Molly was in, my sophomore class 3 years ago. Because again, it was over half women. Everybody totally talented. Nobody gets a blue ribbon in my class because everybody's really good. But frankly, the women were like, I don't want to say the leaders of the class, but they were kind of the leaders of the class. And you know, we had a lot of discussions around this topic. In fact, Molly has a comic that she does called Strong Female Protagonists. And so I hope you check out her comic, but also know that this whole panel was inspired by that class and subsequent classes that happened after that, where we're trying to figure out what's going on with women in comics, both behind the scenes as creators and editors, and also as characters within comic narratives. And this is really what this evening is going to be about. Just to give you a quick overview of the schedule for tonight, these folks are going to talk each for around 10 minutes or so. We're being very chillaxed. There's no stopwatch, about their own work and what they do. And then for about 45 minutes, I'm going to moderate with hopefully interesting questions, I hope. And then, very importantly, we want to leave at least half an hour for you all to be able to have your own questions, and we'll have mics that are being passed around, okay? So by 8:45 exactly, I'm going to cut myself off and have you guys be able to propose questions to our panel. Then afterwards, they've also very generously agreed to sign books and things. And so if you have any wonderful, incredible works by these great creators and editor, please don't hesitate to come down and say hello and get a book signed. Okay, so in any event, I'd like to first introduce Shelley Bond, who is the executive editor of Vertigo, DC Entertainment's premier line of sophisticated, cutting-edge comic books and original graphic novels. Shelley has worked in the comic book industry for over 20 years. She started her career at the highly regarded independent publisher Comico, the comic company, and went from answering phones to editing in less than 2 years. After a brief stint in film editing and casting talent management, Shelley joined Vertigo in the winter of 1992. Her innate passion for all things pop, art, culture, and otherwise is exhibited in her award-winning titles, including, but certainly not limited to, Bill Willingham's Fables, Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, Coffin Hill, and iZombie. Just to wait, I'm sure you've seen this incredible Neil Gaiman. I mean, everybody like read Sandman, right? The incredible Fables, which this particular anthology is amazing. This is another one with incredible artwork, which are really like leading cutting-edge works that I think have influenced the world. I loved that TV show Once, but I don't know if it came from Fables, but I was like, they ripped off Fables with Snow White as the lead.
Well, they were maybe inspired by Fables, which definitely came around maybe 10 years before the TV show.
Absolutely. And Shelley, I have to say, has been great about coming to our events and supporting our Portfolio Review Day in May. Please, if you're a VIP editor person, please come to our Portfolio Review Day, May 14th. I could give you more information. We could all do that, but we'd love to see you there. But it's great that Shelley has been at these events and has really supported SVA in many ways. She lives close, but not close enough, to New York City with her husband, British artist Philip Bond, and their son Spencer. And allegations that she wears 5-inch platforms are completely unfounded. Will you guys please give it up for Shelley Bond? Thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't have written a better introduction for myself. I suppose I have. First of all, thank you all so much for inviting me to this amazing panel. I'm thrilled to be here. I don't often get a chance to sit down for a couple of hours and just talk to people about comics, especially strong female protagonists in comics. I think it's so important to recognize the role of women in comics, both behind the scenes and also, of course, in the comic books. So what I'd like to do is take you through a quick slideshow of some of the really incredible characters that we actually represent at Vertigo right now. When I started in 1992, there were a decent amount of women in the DC offices, but I think since that time, it's grown significantly, and it's so exciting to see more women join the ranks of those of us behind the scenes. There are jobs in comics that people don't know about. It's obvious to see that there is the writer and the artist, but there's so much that happens behind the scenes, whether it's in the accounting department, marketing, sales, and of course, editing, which I always like to say is the greatest job that nobody knows about. I tell people that if you like to boss people around and you can't write and draw, comic book editing is probably for you. It's so gratifying to do what I do every day, and I just can't express enough joy about the process. You get a chance to be part art director, part copy editor, part psychiatrist when you have to call your artists up and get them out of bed so they can draw a page. You get to be part logo designer, part colorist, and basically a Jill of all trades, because if there's a job that comes up that you don't know how to do, you either have to find someone to help you do it or you fake it, and there's nothing more exciting. So let me start off by showing you one of the characters that we have now at Vertigo. Keith mentioned the Fables series. For those of you who don't know Fables, it's basically a modern take on many of the fairy tale characters you grew up with. They're living in modern New York, and they all have very different lives in the modern world. Fairest was an extension of Fables, and it was brought about because Bill Willingham and I really wanted to focus on the female characters from the Fables universe. So we started a whole new series called Fairest, and this particular character is a character from an Indian fable. Her name is Nalayani, and she gives Katniss a run for her money. I have to mention this. I noticed there's someone in the audience, an alumni here named Phil Jimenez, who was my artist on one of my early issues of Fairest. Phil, will you stand up and wave, please? Or sit down and wave. Phil and I go way back. We're not going to tell you what year in the 80s we met, but let's just say he's been doing incredible work for DC and Vertigo, and it was such a pleasure to work with him on the very first arc of Fairest that came out a few years ago. So the character Nalayani is feisty, and she actually goes up against Prince Charming in her storyline, which I thought was not only great because, of course, she's a strong female protagonist, but she's a character from Indian fables. And in addition to always being very conscious about gender and finding more roles for female comic book characters, I think we're always aware of the fact that we need more diversity in comics, and actually media in general. So Nalayani's story was a great one because it really covered both angles. Next up, we have another character from Fairest, Cinderella, who is our super spy, and she gives James Bond a run for his money. She's a shoe store owner by day and the master of swordplay and subterfuge by night. So she takes names and rubs shoulders with her evil fairy godmother from time to time. Next up, we have the leading ladies of Fables. Right now, I believe issue 139 of Fables just came out. We're in our 12th year of publishing, which is huge for a creator-owned project. And the two characters that are really the linchpins of the series are Snow White, who's at the top, and her sister, Rose Red. And this incredible mythos was predicated on the fact that there's a sibling rivalry between the two sisters. So as we enter our final year of the Fable series, the two sisters are really going to battle to the death because they've had a lot of ups and downs, and this is really the year that it comes together, and I'm not quite sure they're both going to survive. You have Snow White in the Fables universe, who was the deputy mayor of Fabletown, and She's the type of person who was cool under pressure, very efficient. She's married to Bigby Wolf, who is the big bad wolf, and they have cubs and lead a really fantastic family life. Rose Red was the former party girl who got herself into a lot of trouble during the early years, but then eventually redeemed herself and actually took over as the leader of the farm, which is the upstate annex of Fabletown, where all the animal fables who can't actually pass as human live. And she's now a leader in her own right. So when you talk about strong female protagonists in comics, they don't get any better than this, in my humble opinion. Next up, we have American Vampire. Is anyone reading American Vampire? Fantastic. Thank you. We're so excited. We are just relaunching the second cycle of this book. Basically, it's an innovative take on vampire mythology. And I'd like to just point out, what we try to do with Vertigo is we try to have an unexpected twist or spin on traditional genre fiction. So I think this is such a great example of a new take on a vampire. The strong female character in American Vampire is named Pearl Jones. She's a former actress from the 1920s, but she's all teeth. She's a total vampire now, and she is just an incredible force of nature in her own right. We also have this incredible character from iZombie, and the character's name is Gwen Dillon, and she's a gravedigger. She's forced to eat a brain every day, or else she'll turn into a shambling zombie. So I kind of look at her as a zombie detective, because when she eats this brain, she also digests all the memories of the dead person. And her mission is to right a wrong or to bring two people together, basically fulfill the dead person's last wish. So she's actually doing a service to the deceased as she's trying to keep herself from going all shambling zombie in her own right. Next up, we have a book called Hinterkind, which is set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. And the main female protagonist in this book is named Prosper Monday. And she basically has been raised in this dystopian society that didn't know about our day and age. It's set in the future, and she's pretty much has to travel through Central Park, which is an absolute wasteland of nothing but trouble everywhere you look. And she has to leave the comforts of her home to help a friend survive. So she's a real adventurer and a very brave woman who has to really battle it out for her friends and family. Up next, we have FBP, which stars one of my favorite new leading ladies. Her name is Rosa Reyes, and she's actually a Latina field agent for the Federal Bureau of Physics. And you probably wonder, what in the world does that mean? Well, basically, she is an agent who hunts down bends and breaks in the fabric of space and time, and she sort of helps people with their problems. She's stoic and tough, and even though her colleagues refer to her as Rain Woman because she's sort of socially stunted, she doesn't let it bother her, and she always shows them up and really takes charge of the situation. So I think she's an incredible, strong female protagonist that if you haven't had a chance to check out, I think you'd really appreciate her story. Dead Boy Detectives is a favorite series of mine going way back. The Dead Boy Detectives were introduced in the Sandman 25, and like the title, they were two schoolboy detectives who were dead, and they spent their time solving crimes. And they were both from the 20th century. So when we wanted to resurrect the series, we knew we had to do something to really shake things up. So we came up with an idea of having a female detective come in, and we thought to represent the 21st century, we would have this wonderful young woman whose name is Crystal Palace, surname von Hovercraft. Naturally, she is the offspring of two art snobs. Her mom is a performance artist, and her father is a rock star. So she's being raised in London by these two very narcissistic parents, And her life changes when she's saved from imminent death by the Dead Boy detectives. And she decides to join their team, and they become a trio of detectives. And she teaches them all about the tech of the 21st century. Next up, we have Death of the Endless, who I think is an incredible character. I mean, of course, she's the personification of death, but she's actually cool. She's a goth girl. She's perky. She actually makes it a little bit easier to accept your pending doom. And she comes from the Sandman mythos, and I think she's always been an incredible, strong character, of course, of Neil Gaiman's design. And she lives on. Over the years, she's been one of the most popular Vertigo characters, and people still dress up as her at conventions, which I think goes to show just how intense and amazing the character is. And last, we have a book called Coffin Hill, which stars a woman named Eve Coffin, who is a witch. She comes from a long line of witches that dates back to Salem. The book is set in Coffin Hill, Massachusetts. And basically, Eve is an ex-cop. She was shot on the job, and she returns to her hometown because she has nowhere left to go. When she gets home, she realizes that there was a horrible evil that she and her friends unleashed in the woods all those years ago, and it's been running rampant through the town, and she's now back to hopefully contain the horror that she caused all those years ago. So she's a very damaged character. I think you can tell from the image. She's sort of scarred, and she still practices witchcraft, but she's much more pragmatic, and she's very concerned about righting the wrongs that she caused. So it makes a really compelling character and story in this particular book. So that was just a sampling of some of the strong female protagonists that I like to think we have at Vertigo. We publish between 12 and 15 titles, and it's very rare that there isn't a book that touches upon either an issue relating to women or that features a strong female protagonist. I think it's because we're really aware of the fact that we need to represent more in comics. And I'm just proud of the fact that I think that we have so many incredible writers that are out on the streets and that capture the zeitgeist of our times.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shelley. Thank you so much. There's an amazing roster of titles. It's fantastic. I'd like to now introduce Aletha E. Martinez, who started working in the comics industry in the 1990s as an assistant to Joe Quesada on Azrael and Ash and Daredevil. Then as an inker's assistant on Aquaman. She got her first headlining role as an artist penciling in 1999 on Iron Man. And Nelson DeCastro, who teaches here, said to give a shout out to Aletha because he also worked on those volumes, and has since worked on X-Men, Black Sun, Marvel Age, Fantastic Four, Black Panther, Voltron, NBC's Heroes, New 52, Batgirl, Archie Comics' New Crusaders, and is currently creating the WWE Superstars for Paper Cuts, which you could see in all the comic book stores everywhere. She has worked on larger projects that required more than just penciling and inking in graphic novels like Vampire, My Boyfriend Bites, Kung Fu Masters, Quest for Dragon Mountain from Lerner Publications, an amazing book. And also she has created political cartoons for the New York Post. In her spare time, she works on her own creator-owned titles, Human Ever, Foreign, and this is a special sneak peek that she's showing me just tonight, and Ninjo, which she publishes through her company, Riot Storm Productions. She would also like to send a shout out to her wonderful comics industry family, and most especially to her son Michael, who is her cheering squad, her mini editor, and a wonderful source of amazement with the stories he tells now as he grows into an artist in his own right. And Aletha has inspired personally a lot of my own students who really turned me on to her incredible work. Hopefully you could seek out these titles, but I also really encourage you to look at online for her work, especially at deviantart.com. It'll blow you away. as I'm sure she will with her work and her talk tonight. So please welcome Aletha Martinez.
Well, good evening. My name's Aletha Martinez. There's not much I can say. I'm used to drawing and not speaking. So I stay home and I work and work and work, and I sleep and get up and do that over and over and over again. Some of the titles I've worked on, of course, he mentioned, starting with Iron Man, which was really, really incredible to have that as my first book to do. And one of the latest ones, there's a page from New 52, Batgirl. I've been mostly mainstream my whole career, although I try to stretch out and do new things, try new things. If someone offers me a project, it's something I've never drawn before, I always say, sure, I can draw that. Then I figure it out along the way. Oh, did I skip one? I think I might have. No, I didn't. And this is one of the covers from my own title, You, Me, and Ever. It's my hobby. I draw for a living, I draw for a hobby, and then when I'm done drawing and I want to relax, I draw some more. Yes. And these are kind of things I like to draw for myself. It's very difficult to do this kind of work with this level of detail on a monthly schedule, but for my own title, you could get in there and draw the little people in the little windows and all the new characters. Here's Yumi. I didn't find there was a lot of female characters throughout my career. I've mostly drawn males. So whenever I do get to draw a woman, she's usually in support of another male character. They're fighting, or she's being rescued. I love the rescuing, constant. But Yumi's a little different. She's very relaxed. And this is where she's grown up here after the big war and big fight and big fuss. And she will soon meet, let's see if Ever, the other half of the book. He came literally falling out of the sky and creating that crater. I'm giving a little overview of my book that I will be putting out maybe this one, October-ish. Because it's my hobby, I have to do it in between my day jobs. These are pages from Foreign. Foreign is a novel I've been writing since I was a small child. I write every single day. I write whether I'm sick or well, and I'll plan to write on my deathbed. And that was told to me by someone who came to visit my school when I was 10 years old and had just come to this country. You see, where I come from and being of a Spanish descent, art was not what they would let us do. They called it pachingo, which is clown work. It's not something that they encouraged. So my family would never hear of me doing things like this. God, things like that. Oh, no, that's not happening. So it was something I had to do on my own. I had to come up here to New York by myself, when I came to the country, I was in Florida, and Florida has no comic scene at all at the time. In fact, I literally had to go to the edge of hell, this little flea market, to buy a comic book called Hirobi. Yes, see, I draw ladies too, not just dudes. And it was very difficult, even talking about comic books, especially in the 90s, at that time, we were so isolated away from everything. But Marvel tryouts did come to our town, and they 3 to 5 pages, get it together, and my art teacher said, no, not you, because I'm trying to spare you. And that's when I first learned that women did not draw comic books, not at all. And my grandmother, who was raising me at the time, said, see, I told you so. It's better to be a doctor. You'll be better off. You'll like that. Yes. So I moved to New York here, and luckily I got a portfolio together. I actually came to SVA for a few summers, and as he said, when I entered the classroom, there were 2 girls and 1 left, and it was just me and all these guys. And I asked one question of my teacher, then Howard Post. It's like, do I have to draw in front of people? And once he said no, I said, okay, I'm going to try this. This might be for me, But that was a long time ago. And there's not much more I can say. I didn't want to let people ask me questions about it. I let the work speak, and that's all, because I really believe in just trying to get that done. That's my legacy. Other than that, I have nothing more to offer the world than the work that I do and the next project that I'm on.
Well, Aletha, I've heard you speak before. I think you have a lot of bon mots to give this crew, but as you say, well, I'd like to now introduce Diane Newman. who was born in Brooklyn, New York, and attended the High School of Music and Art at Brooklyn College and also at Pratt Institute. She is the creator of Dee Dee Glitz. This is the new anthology, and editor of the famous Twisted Sister anthologies of women cartoonists that, frankly, I grew up with. Really, I was in college, and like that was my introduction to so many female creators. You have no idea. And I still recommend not only this book but Twisted Sisters to all my students all the time. They're amazing, so please check those out. One of the early contributors, she was one of the earlier contributors to women's comics, WIMMEN. I think it was turned to MYN at some point, but I could be wrong. Newman created the first issue of Twisted Sisters comics with Eileen Kominsky-Crumb in 1976. Diane's work has also been published in many books, magazines, and comic books. An anthology of her collected comics, Glitz to Go, was published by Fantagraphics in February 2012. An amazing, amazing book. I recommend it to everyone. It's so fun to like pour through and read. In 1981, she collaborated on the musical comedy I'd Rather Be Doing Something Else, the Dee Dee Glitz story with the San Francisco-based women's theater group Les Nicolettes. She has curated and shown work in shows in New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, and she's currently working on a graphic memoir detailing her parents' involvement with the Communist Party in the 1950s, which I think we get a little taste of here, like the Red Diaper Baby comic, which is really intriguing and great. Will you guys please welcome Diane Newman?
Well, this is sort of a time capsule. This is Twisted Sisters comic book, which was published by Last Gasp Comics in San Francisco in 1976. It was actually post-women's comics, which was much earlier. This was Eileen and I think this just changed on its own. This is from Women's Comics. I don't know why. I suppose you could call her a very strong female protagonist since she has a gun in her hand, and the plot is that she gets pregnant and the butcher from Red Hook won't marry her, so she decides to rob a bank and escape to Rio. And that's basically the plot of the story, and it was also the plot of the show, I'd Rather Be Doing Something Else. So this was in Women's Comics. I think it was very, very early on, and it was something I still like, which is kind of interesting. This is also from Women's Comics, much later, and it's basically Dee Dee's story of a obsessive love affair. And this is just the splash panel. And it's just kind of a beauty parlor, and they're saying, you know, she really means it, watch out, don't ask. This is another Women's Comics excerpt, Utterly Private Eye. I was just having fun with sort of Raymond Chandler language and being kind of a noir comic. And Dee Dee's the detective. So she's the one with her feet on the desk and the whiskey in the drawer. This was a 3D issue of Women's Comics, which actually came with 3D glasses. Thank you. So Dee Dee's trying on a whole bunch of clothes, and she's saying, stretch, damn it, stretch. And the sales lady says, can I help you with anything? And she says, only if you do liposuction. And ultimately, she goes to Weight Watchers and then winds up eating all the food out of the garbage that she threw away. This is Twisted Sisters Comics Anthology, which I edited. And it really was kind of a very important event in women's comics of that time. And I actually thought that it would make a huge difference, because we went out of comic book stores and we wound up in shopping malls and we got good reviews, got, had the book and images from it in Art Forum. And so it was a really influential thing at the time. I've found out since that there are many, many women artists today who have no idea that it ever existed. So I do recommend, if you have access to it in the library, that you check it out, because I think that the stories are still extremely relevant. A lot of them are very personal, and there's a huge array. There's, I think, 14 cartoonists, and I'm actually going to say their names because I think you should hear them. Phoebe Gleckner. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of any of these women. Dori Seda, Aileen Crum, Carol Mosevich, myself, Christine Critter, Leslie Sternberg, M.K. Brown, Mary Fleener, Carol Lay, Penny Moran Van Horn, whose story is about her being committed to an insane asylum, and Karen Leshin, Carol Tyler, and Julie Doucet. And we did a follow-up issue, which was called Twisted Sisters Drawing the Line. And it had a lot of the same women in it, but this work, the first book, had work that was previously done, and Drawing the Line had work that was done specifically for the book. Let's see. This was a story I did for the second book, Twisted Sisters Drawing the Line, and it's a long story. It's 12 pages, and so it just shows the horrors of someone who's trying to have a baby, a happily married couple, and the woman has 4 miscarriages. It's very close to a very personal story, but it also has my character, Dee Dee Glitz. This is the end of the story where I'm just kind of giving up, and I'm talking to Dee Dee as if she's interested, and she's just kind of sleeping and drooling. And then I say, I've come to this fabulous conclusion. I don't care anymore. I've given up the hope of having a baby. And I say, suddenly I feel lighter. And she looks at me and says, lighter? Honey, don't kid yourself. This is the end papers of the anthology that I did that's called Glitz to Go. And these are the many faces of Dee Dee, and I kind of like the way they turned out. Okay. The many moods. Oops. All right. This is the last one. This is an anthology, pretty much covers everything I've done. And it includes photos of the play that Les Nicolettes did in San Francisco, and a lot of my early work and later work. And it does have a story, as Keith said, that is called Red Diaper Baby, which is the name for people whose parents were communists. And a lot of you may not know. Some people think, it meant I had an illness or something, but it's actually, my parents were communists in Long Island in the 1950s, and I didn't know. My sister and I had not a clue. We went to Republican Party picnics and all that stuff. But my parents had all these books, and they had a printing press in the attic for when the revolution came. They were going to print broadsides. And it was just a very weird time for me, because my sister and I cannot remember anything about it. We can't remember. My father said, "Do you remember all those uncles who came and visited?" And what they were doing was they were money laundering for the communists and giving people who stayed at our house papers and money and sort of being a safe house until they could escape to Mexico or Czechoslovakia or wherever they were going. This was at the time when you get put in jail for being a communist. And it's a very fascinating subject for me, and I am doing a book on it, but I'm still in the early stages of it, and it's called Back to Abnormal. And I guess that's it.
Thank you so much. And I guarantee you we have both editions of Twisted Sisters in the library, at least one copy of each. I think we have multiple copies of them. So, and we also have Glitz to Go, as well as all these creators and Shelley's books too. Raina Tellemeier is the last person I have the great honor to introduce. She got her BFA from SVA, we're proud to say, in 2002. And this was part of a zeitgeist. There was an amazing movement around the turn of the century where we had a group of women called Estragus. You guys might have heard of Becky Cloonan. And a lot of the Estragus crew who all really supported one another. While they were at SVA, they were famous already. They had a website that got 1,000 hits a day. They had their own lawyers because they were doing animation for this movie called Super Troopers. And that was amazing. And there were a few other people who were in my classes that have gone on to great things, but Raina really is just one of the leaders of the pack. She's the author and illustrator of the graphic novels Smile and Drama. Smile, and you might know Drama, both #1 New York Times bestsellers. I have to say, like I was telling a friend, I think every child in America has read this book. All my friends' kids have read this book. I was telling somebody about it today, about this panel, hoping that she would come. And she said, oh my gosh, my daughter would really love that because she's getting her braces off in a few weeks. And I said, absolutely, she would like it. But then she ended up calling right during that conversation. And my friend said, oh, have you read Raina Tellemeier's Smile graphic novel? And her daughter replied, oh, Mom, I totally read that. We've all read that. So anyway, it's in airport bookstores. I think when you get into the airport bookstore, you really know that you've like gone to the mainstream. Along with her husband's work, Dave Roman, Astronaut Academy, equally great. She has also adopted and illustrated 4 graphic novel versions of Anne M. Martin's Babysitter's Club series and has contributed short stories to many anthologies. Her accolades include an Eisner Award, Boston Globe Horn Book Honor, a Stonewall Honor, and many best of and notable lists. Her upcoming graphic novel, Sisters, A Companion to Smile, comes out very soon this August. So please welcome Raina Tellemeier.
Turn of the century SVA. I've never heard anybody describe it like that before, Keith, and now I feel extremely old, so thank you.
Well, it turned our school around.
So I came here in 1999 and graduated in 2002, and in the time that I was here, I was an illustration major, because when I first came for my consultation meeting with the then chair, Jack Endewalt, I said, I really like comics and I really like to draw. What should I major in? And he was like, definitely illustration, because he had a bias toward illustration. And I was like, okay, you're the guy who knows everything, so I'll just take your advice. But what ended up happening was I got here, and all I wanted to do was make comics. And my illustration teachers were like, why don't you make illustrations? Stop making so many comics, Raina. But my cartooning teachers thought that was awesome. So it was Joey Cavallari's class that I first started making comics in. He's here tonight, yay! Hi, Joey. And Joey really was one of those teachers who just like brought in tons of books and exposed me to lots of artists I had never seen before, and introduced me to like James Kachalka's online autobio comics, and kind of just expanded my comics world, which before that had mostly been comic strips. And as one of his class projects, we had to make mini comics, and that's the first issue of, actually that's the second issue technically, of Takeout there on the left. That was just a class project for Joey's class, which compiled short story projects that we did. And I kept doing it even after I wasn't in Joey's class anymore. I did this for Jessica Abel and Matt Madden's class was the other comics class that I took here. So, I mean, when I look back at my time at SVA, I think about making comics and being in VASA. And one of the things I did when I was in VASA was I created Fresh Meat. If you guys are students here, you know what that is. And if you don't...
Friday, May 3rd,
Yes.
in the student lounge near here, please come to Fresh Meat. Raina Telemeyer's Fresh Meat.
It was just called the SVA Student Comics Expo at the time. But that was one of the things I did while I was here. And I just graduated and kept doing this and really enjoyed so much making mini comics and telling short stories. But I didn't really have the confidence to tell long form stories. So the Takeout Minis got onto the radar of an editor at Scholastic, David Saylor, and at the time that they were starting up their graphics imprint, which is their comic book imprint. And at the time, their bannerhead title was going to be Jeff Smith's Bone, which was one of my favorite independently published comics. So we sat down and talked about like what I could possibly do for them. And my ideas just were not graphic novel ideas at the time. They were short stories. So we decided to have me do an adaptation series, The Babysitter's Club, which was one of my favorite book series when I was a kid. So I did that for 4 years and felt like I really got my legs under me as far as doing long-form stories. And it was cool to be sort of like a self-published artist with this huge platform all of a sudden. It got me a lot of exposure I wouldn't have gotten otherwise, and I was really grateful for that. And then when I finished this series, they were like, well, what else you got? And what I got was this webcomic that I had been working on called Smile, which was a true story about my dentistry hell in middle school. So when I was in 6th grade, I was running and fell one evening and knocked out my 2 front permanent teeth, and then had to spend all of middle school, about half of high school without them. So I just decided to write about this experience, and I just put one comic up on the web a week, 1 page, and the next thing I knew, I had 120 pages of content, and Scholastic said, okay, we'll publish this. So they were the ones who encouraged me to color it, and it's sort of the thing I'm best known for now. It sort of became a phenomenon, and I'm still super confused as to how that happened. But it's about my teeth. That's not the kind of subject that you tell people I write comics about, and people are like, oh, that sounds super interesting, okay. But inevitably, a lot of young girls out there, and boys too, are dealing with teeth when they're about 10 years old. So it's a story about teeth, but it's also a story about like your life when you're in middle school and how it sucks, and how your friends tease you, and how sometimes you have the wrong friends and have to leave those friends behind, and how you have crushes on boys, you're in the Girl Scouts. So it just kind of ended up being sort of my personal / every American girl experience. Super fascinating to sort of have something you create about your own personal self become something you're really well known for. And I followed that up with a book called Drama, which is not autobiographical. It's a fictionalized sort of account of my days in theater when I was in high school and having crushes on gay boys. Yay. And I created a character named Callie who has purple and pink hair, and that's how you know it's not me, because I never had purple or pink hair. And Callie loves theater, but she can't sing a note. She has no shame, though, so she's not afraid to get up on stage and audition for a play just because she knows it'll make her friends feel better. But her passion is like set design and theater tech, so she is backstage with the lights and the curtains and the set design and all this stuff back there. And it was cool to create a girl character who was really passionate about art and passionate about, you know, stuff that wasn't just her gay boyfriends. But yeah, I had a lot of fun doing this book, and this book got a Stonewall Honor Award, which is the LGBT like highest honor in literature. So I was really, really proud of myself for that. And it was a really interesting experience. And this was my first foray into non-autobio. And of course, I'm going back to autobio now with my next book, which is Sisters. This is not about teeth whatsoever, but it is about sisters. And people have told me a lot of other people have sisters too, so it's possible this will also ring a bell somewhere with somebody. We shall see. And it does talk about like the present day, quote unquote, which is me at 14 going on a road trip with my family, but it flashes back to a lot of scenes from my childhood with me and my younger sister. We're both artists. We were kind of competitive growing up, and we have extremely different personalities. So it was sort of a fun like cat and mouse kind of story to explore. And it will talk about our pets that we had, especially the snake that my sister had. I hate snakes tremendously, so that adds a lot of delightful tension to the story. So, my life's awesome. Humble brag. There was a point at which people didn't really know what I was doing and how to categorize it because I was making personal stories, generally about female characters. And there were a lot of female readers of comics, but most of them were adults. And Scholastic took a chance and said, yes, we think that we can publish comics that are aimed towards a girl audience with girl characters at the center. And it's been, let's see, I got my first contract almost 10 years ago. And in 10 years, I feel like we have seen the sea change, and we have seen that girls do love comics, and girls will line up for hours to meet comics creators and then email them afterwards to tell them how much their books mean to them. So, yay! Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys so much for that really informative, wonderful presentations of your work. And I think we have about, I'm going to cut myself off, or if you guys could remind me when it's 8:45 to cut myself off so we could have questions from you all, which I think are probably the most important things here. But I have been, I've been stewing about this for a long time, and I have all these questions to ask. And in general, I'm just going to ask questions. If you guys want to answer, it's great, and I'm not going to force you to answer anything. As I mentioned, over half my classes now are wonderfully women. And I think largely due to the rise and influence perhaps of manga and anime. I mean, it's my theory that DC and Marvel always want, well, I don't know if there's any truth to the stereotype trope that women and females or girls don't go into comic book stores. Are there women who grew up going into comic book stores? Okay, so that's like a stupid stereotype that's not real. But my theory was that DC and Marvel always wanted to get into Barnes & Noble and Borders, but the books just didn't fit in the shelf because they were oversized books. And then a company called Tokyopop was able to have the genius understanding that if they were able to translate manga, Japanese comics with bad computer fonts, they fit into the shelves at Barnes & Noble and Borders, and they could get into the mainstream bookstores where hopefully they would reach a broader audience than merely the comic book stores. And also, with cable, they had all these channels to fill, and they needed, cheap content. And they realized, just like the Sony executives who loved Tezuka's Astro Boy, that these cartoons in Japan were amazing, based many times on manga, that they were very literate and great, and they could get bad Canadian voice actors to dub them, and they could put them on endless cable channels. And people growing up watching that stuff realized, in America we had that problem with Wortham, right? The Dr. Phil Avezira, who wrote The Seduction of the Innocent, that demonized comics and said it would cause juvenile delinquency. This school started as a comics school. I don't know if people know that. But in part to stay open, we expanded our program and called it the School of Visual Arts. But really, they relegated comics to be, about good versus evil, maybe for like 13-year-old boys, I don't know. But, before this, a lot of people in America read comics. It was this one guy who made up a lot of this information that really truncated the progress of comics in America. In Europe, you have Hergé, who did Tintin, and the people who did Asterix and so on, that, with great artists like Rembrandt, there are a lot of people following their wake. A lot of people followed those people in Europe. In Japan, of course, you have Osamu Tezuka, created 150,000 pages of comics, including Astro Boy, but also one of the first shoujo comics, Princess Knight. But in any event, like, this great content was accessible to more people than a lot of the mainstream superhero stories were, and a lot of my students were growing up reading that. Plus great graphic novels like Persepolis. Sometimes the undergrounds like Twisted Sisters, Diane, your work, Julie Doucet, and just also the rise of sort of Cartoon Network, great cartoons that really helped to feed the desire to do comics. Do you all see similar or other trends gaining female readers and creators now? And importantly, what were some of your greatest influence? How were you inspired to do this? If you didn't already talk about it in your presentation.
So influences?
Yeah, and you could disagree with any of the things I said.
No, I think you pretty much nailed a lot of it. Personally, my influences were like Calvin and Hobbes, and For Better or For Worse, especially by Lynn Johnston, which was kind of like my realistic fiction comic, which was amazing. I love
a great female creator who was best friends with Charles Schulz.
Yeah. Linda Berry's work meant a lot to me when I was a kid. YA books did not really exist when I was a teenager, so Linda Berry was like my YA. And then I was just like a Disney kid, so I just watched a ton of animated movies, and I was like, you need like 100 people to make an animated movie, but a comic you can make by yourself. I'm a total loner. I like working alone.
The Little Mermaid in particular, right?
Heck yeah.
Do any of you others have any inspirations that you'd like to share? Or
I think
observations?
I'm from an era a little bit before yours, and I didn't see like Disney stuff. It wasn't on TV. We had Robotech, Voltron, those kind of things. That's what I grew up watching. Where characters die, they don't get into Pokeballs and return later for you. Once you're dead, you're dead. You're like, no, they killed him, why? So that greatly influenced me. And of course, I watched Wonder Woman. It's like, that's what I want to grow up to be, the giant woman. Built like a brick you-know-what house. That's her, I didn't see all this stuff. It was cute seeing it, because I personally did not enjoy it. But, it was different, because can't say any of the boys around me enjoyed that stuff either. We played football in the street most of the time, but just to be able to know that can bleed into comics and feel that was a world that I could not get into, that was a whole different experience. And later on with the web comics and everything, all this camaraderie and this good old, all this female wonderfulness, there was not that. That just did not exist. It was more like, they'd look at my work and they'd say, oh, you don't draw like a girl. I don't know what girls are supposed to draw like, but whatever it was, they don't see it in the work. And, as people, they get out, they put their name forth, they put themselves forth. No, it's the work that I thought always should go forward, not, it doesn't matter what I'm doing, it matters about the work. So it's nice. I like to meet people who have this strong influence. You got out and you talk about the things you do for yourself. It's like, you like to do it on your own. I need a committee. I need editors. I need people.
Editors are awesome.
Yes, they need the what?
I agree.
They have to watch me. I need watching.
And bossing around, a little bossing around too?
A whole lot of bossing around.
Excellent.
I need Jim to come move into my house with me. You have to come home with me now.
That costs extra, I think. I actually got into comics in a very different way. I didn't really read comics as a kid. I was really into the Peanuts. I loved Charles Schulz. And I watched Marine Boy. That was my favorite cartoon in the 70s. But I didn't even really know comic books still existed until I got into college. And I took a screenwriting class in the late 80s. And my teacher showed us a copy of Peter Gross's Empire Lanes. And he explained the art of storytelling to us and storyboarding. And I thought it was fascinating. And there was a kid in my class who sat next to me, and he had black nail polish and red hair hanging over his eye, and he was reading a copy of Love and Rockets. And he said, if you like the comics, you should go check out the comic book store. And I gave him a really strange look, and I said, okay. So I followed him to the comic book store, and I walked in, and I was like Dorothy in Oz. Oh. It was such a wonderful time to discover comics. Elektra Assassin was popular. Painted comics were suddenly all the rage. I bought Moonshadow, Dracula, Blooded Tale, and Grendel and Hellblazer. And I just walked I had a big stack of comics in my arms, and I walked to the register, and I just bought everything that looked interesting to me, and I was hooked. So when I graduated from college the following year, I sent 212 resumes out trying to get a job in film, and I didn't get any replies. So I moved to Philadelphia. I went to my local comic book store, and I heard that Comico the comic company was looking for an editorial assistant, and they were located about half an hour away from Philadelphia. I went and had the interview, and Diana Schutz hired me. And I have to say that I was so lucky to be hired by two strong female women in comics. Diana hired me, and in 3 months, she taught me the ropes, and then she left the company. And I was so fortunate that the publisher of the company asked me if I wanted to stay and become the editorial department. I was literally answering phones and stuffing submissions bags. And I said, of course, I can edit comics. And I learned trial by fire by the wonderful, talented artists and writers who actually were working for the company, and the art director who taught me about color theory. And I got such a wonderful training and entree into the business. And when the company went under 2 years later, which had nothing to do with me, I swear, I worked a little bit in my field, but realized I just missed comics. I was really born to bring people together to create words and pictures on paper. So I was lucky enough to apply for a job at DC right before Vertigo launched. I was living in Philadelphia. I sent my resume to Karen Berger. She was 3 weeks away from launching the Vertigo line, and she had 2 people that she was deciding about hiring. She couldn't make up her mind, and I was the wild card. I just got in at the right time, but she told me I had to be there in 2 weeks. So I literally walked a 6-block radius around the DC Comics building. I took the cheapest apartment in Hell's Kitchen. I didn't tell my father, because he would have never let me live there. And I just did it anyway, and I have not looked back. I have been so fortunate to have been with the company for over 20 years, making such incredible comics.
That's true. Thank you. Watchmen and Dark Knight were part of that zeitgeist, but you didn't mention them.
Absolutely. No, definitely. They were important to me, too. I have to say I gravitated more towards the indie comics. I was a huge Love and Rockets fan, and also really started to crave more female characters in comics. And I think at that time, Black Orchid was brought out by Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean, and Sandman. And I have to say, you mentioned something really interesting about over the past maybe 8 to 10 years, there's been a nice rise in women reading comics because of anime. Back in the 90s, I think Sandman can be credited for bringing a lot of women into comics because Neil Gaiman sure knows how to write a female character. And I think a lot of people went from bringing their girlfriends into comic book stores to sharing their comic books with their girlfriends, and then suddenly their friends realized you don't need to have a boyfriend to read and enjoy comics. So we saw a wonderful resurgence of women actually reading comics and also writing and drawing comics. And I think we've tried so hard to even surpass our goals of keeping the industry very level with both men and women contributing.
That's really good. I'm just curious, how many of you are Sandman fans? Great. Okay, really good. Really good. Now, Diane and Aletha, a little bit, do you guys want to talk more about how you got your start or some of your early struggles and successes? And I know you already talked about this a little bit, but I don't want to put you on the spot, but.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, both of you guys. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I started out reading any comic book I could find. I preferred Little Lulu and Uncle Scrooge because I liked the narratives, but if Superman, Superboy, or Superdog was available, I'd read that too. So I think I grew up just absorbing the language of comics. And I went to art school. And then I wrote kind of tortured poetry, and it never occurred to me I could put both of them together and create something called comics. And I was just lucky that I was around when women's comics was starting. At that time, most of the underground comics were done by men, and a lot of women felt that if they got in, there would be like one woman in a book or something, and so they wanted to start their own comic. And I think that also at the time, the underground was incredibly the antithesis of anything from DC or Marvel, because what they had then was like Conan the Barbarian, and I couldn't relate to that.
Yeah.
And there weren't all these female characters that you're talking about, which is very interesting. But so at the time, you had to create your own. And I was influenced by Justin Green, who was the first underground cartoonist to do autobiographical work. He did a book called Binky Brown Meets the Holy Virgin Mary. And I'm sure none of you have heard of it, but it's a wonderful, wonderful book. If you have it, access to it, I recommend it highly. I also was influenced in general by the other underground cartoonists that I liked and respected, and Aileen Kaminsky was one of them. And I was lucky enough to become a friend of hers and to do a book with her. And we had, although we had very different styles and attitudes, there was something about our work that meshed. And I felt I had found a person who understood what I wanted to do. Then it really disturbs me how many women don't understand that there were a lot of women cartoonists that happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, especially in the 90s when the Twisted Sisters books came out. I feel like I thought I was doing something to bring women cartoonists to the public attention. And at that time, it seemed true, but it's not something that lasted. So I can only say that if any of you feel that way, I recommend that you check out those books.
I have to say that honestly, I really feel that you opened the window with the Twisted Sister anthology, and now history has capitulated and like is zoomed forward. But I think that is part of the canon. I really do feel that that's part of the history. I mean, I go back to those anthologies all the time, and also the original, underground comics. I mean, for myself growing up in the 70s, I love superhero books. I love the kids stuff. I loved Mad, which I think really influenced so much of underground comics, talking about a culture. I mean, as you guys know, all the EC artists who were subjugated by Wortham's ideology all created Mad, and in some ways I feel like it was reacting against it. But for me, I loved heavy metal, but a lot of it was sort of about naked women with wings. I mean, I love Mobius and so on, but really, if I wanted great content, really great art, it was through the undergrounds, which, of course, you're very much part of it. And I have to say, was it Marge's Little Lulu, or was it John Stanley's, or both?
Well, no, it was books.
One of the, in quotes, first great female cartoonists, Marge, who created Little Lulu, is such an important character, and also inspired Friends of Lulu, an important collective that was around for quite a long while.
I think I was also obsessed with Brenda Starr,
Yeah.
who was done by Dale Messick. And talk about a strong female protagonist. Dale Messick took on an ambiguous name, but she was a woman. And Brenda Starr was like a star reporter in love with a mystery man. It was very good when you were like 10 years old, living on Long Island.
Now, Aletha, not to put you on the spot, but I know that Joe Quesada was sort of a mentor of yours. How'd you come about meeting him? And I know he helped you quite a bit. And you went to SVA, but also he taught you a lot of the ropes, maybe about cartooning specifically, or?
I always say Joe did like the best thing for me ever. He left me alone. He didn't stain me with his influence. Our styles are different. He hired me. I worked for him. He taught me a lot. But at the end of the day, he didn't lord over me. Even now, we don't.
Good.
We don't speak, really. When he sees me, we are close. Like I say, he left me intact. He didn't leave me as a shadow of him. And how I met him was I had to get together a portfolio. I'm sorry I never heard of you throughout the past, but it was the vacuum I was in when growing up and coming to the country and, having to relearn the language and being in Florida, there was nothing. There was really nothing. I mean, you could hear the banjo music and the echoing on the wind just about. It was very difficult. And then to say that this is what I wanted to do with my life, to always know that I wanted to draw and I wanted to tell a story. That's what I really came here to do. And I don't feel I've done that yet. I've been able to tell my own story, but just this massive influence of Conan was one of my favorites, but it was difficult to get. This was not something I could go to a store and buy. I had to beg my mother to get into a car when she was around. Please take me 2.5 hours away to go to a flea market to buy books out of a bin. And that was it. So it was very, very difficult to get to these things. So I had no clue. I didn't know anything about the process. I didn't know how it was done, and I kind of set my hat really high. As much as I drew for myself, I knew I wanted to draw for the others. I needed to get to that point, but I didn't know how I was going to get there. So I moved to New York literally with that duffel bag and a guitar. Yes, I play guitar. That's what I did. Got on a Greyhound bus. It was a rock song. And I came here, had no idea what I was going to do. I had no idea how to even go about doing this stuff. I had to figure out what size by trial and error. I was drawing on that cardboard Bristol, and I realized the size just because it's like, this seems about right. And luckily, when I finally got to ask an artist, they're like, yeah, that's the size we draw. And I'm like, how did I even guess that? Tried all the pencils, all of everything, taught myself perspective because I didn't even know about SVA at that time. By the time I learned about SVA, I was just about ready. So I created a portfolio, 3 to 5 pages. I think I did 5 pages altogether. I met Jim Lee the day before, and I met Joe Quesada the day after at a comic book convention. Used to hold them down in the basements of the churches, remember, up here back.
Sure.
It's not that long ago. Come on, ladies, don't leave me out here by myself.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
And I didn't want to talk to him because he and Jimmy, they looked like thugs. They were scary. They were big and scary, and I wasn't half the size I am now. This is good living and lots of food and comics. So I showed him my portfolio, and he's like, I'm going to give you a trial by fire. And he called me the next day. And he's like, well, I'm working on Osriel Ash, and I need a background artist, and you have to ghost at that time, which means my name is not in any of the early books I've done. My name is not in, even up to Marvel Knights, Daredevil, my name is not in that book. Because you work and you become part of the art team, and that's fine. I did that through my run on Aquaman, and at one point you're doing everything but the little faces. But all of those things were learning experiences. You do that, you take that seat so that you can step forward when it's your time. You know, it's not always your time when you start.
Did you mention Conan?
Yes.
Okay, because it's kind of funny, you know, Becky Cloonan has penciled and I think inked Conan, which is kind of neat. She herself is a strong female protagonist, doing like the epitome of macho. What's it like doing worldwide Federation characters now? Like these huge. You're saying that those guys look like thugs, but these guys that you're.
I'm going to say that. I'm surprised that I can do it in a manner that people recognize it. I've recently spoke at my son's school, and small children recognize them. It's difficult work. It's not like comic work because the characters don't live in my head. They have to look like the people. So I have to sketch them, sleep on it, get up and re-sketch them, decide how this action's going to work, and then try to make them look like these characters. At the same time, you can't you can't just find them online. You have to sit there and go, okay, I can turn him by myself. So it's a different process. And I like that throughout every book you draw. It's something different, something new, something I've never done before.
And kind of neat too that you're the puppet master behind these characters. I mean, who are like so.
I don't know if it's that way.
Well,
I draw from a script, and
right.
you know I do what I'm told
you
to
do. The acting and making them come to life, you know, as well as the drawing.
I guess so. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. I like to start a lot of my classes sometimes by saying you guys are all feminists, right? And then it's funny because over half my class will be like, no, including the women, mostly the women too, will be like, no, I'm not a feminist. And so I say, well, do you believe in equal pay for equal work? And of course, everybody nods affirmatively. I say, well, you guys are all feminists then. There are many different kinds of feminisms, and it's not just what the conservative, stereotypes that the conservatives paint. Like, there are many different kinds of levels and ideas, but for me, it really is about equality. And in that same sort of, we need to respect our past, but I think sometimes our students are still very young and don't recognize that. Sometimes they say the position of women in comics, both behind the scenes and within the stories, is strong and, in quotes, normal. And again, I want this to be proactive, but I'm also a son of a psychoanalyst. And psychoanalysis is about like sort of turning over the rocks and seeing all the writhing worms so you could deal with the worms and get over them. And so I do want to address issues that may or may not be around. Do you all feel that the position of women in comics, both behind the scenes and within the narratives, is strong and normal? And would you say that for all genres of comics? And what about indie versus mainstream?
I think that it's not going to be equal until we don't have an adjective.
Mm-hmm.
And, you have an adjective unless you're a white male cartoonist.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, at the same time I used it, you know, I'm perfectly willing to use it as a way, as a hook, you know, to get people to look at my comics, but the ideal thing would be to not have women cartoonists, just have cartoonists.
Right. I think that in terms of hiring people, I'm always going to hire the best person for the job and the right person for the job. A number of years ago, I started a line of young adult comics called Minx. And I started that line, and it was precisely for the reasons that you cited for that recent boom in young readers. We noticed that manga was taking off, and I was always aware of the fact that the young adult readers didn't have any comics. And like Raina was saying, you know, it was a very long time until you could actually find something to read as a teenager that had the sequential medium or even illustrated text and prose. So I came up with the idea of designing a line of comic books for the young adult reader to at once provide an alternative for manga readers and also appeal to the young adult fiction readers. And sadly, the line only lasted for 2 years, but I think we created some terrific books. The idea was to create books that were about young women and the relationships and the friends and the adventures that they wanted to read about. And so, of course, I reached out first and foremost to all the female writers and artists in the industry, but I knew that at the end of the day, I had to buy the best material. So it was really a mixture of men and women who contributed to the line. And in the beginning, I got a lot of flack for not having all women. But to be really fair, I wanted to buy a diverse amount of material, and I really wanted to capture different genres and have completely different ideas. So I really felt that I needed to just look at the content first. And a great writer can write a terrific female cadence and can write stories about strong female characters. That's just hiring a great writer. So I think that there's sometimes reverse discrimination that actually gets foisted upon us, which is a shame. I think we just have to be, you know, very open to bringing new people into comics, whether they're writers or artists or editors and assistants.
Yeah, I grew up, I love Marge's Little Lulu, but I also love the John Stanley Little Lulu, who was a really great, young, strong female protagonist, and shows you that sensitive male writer can write great, you know, storylines that star female protagonists. Was Minx just ahead of its time, do you think? Or
you know what? Some people have said that. I'd like to believe so, because of course it was my initiative, and I'm so proud of it. I think it was tough for us at that time to actually convince the booksellers in the young adult literature section to give the books a chance, because they were so not used to selling graphic novels. I think now, here we are, so many years later, and it's the norm, and you see books like Raina's Drama and Smile, and I think about that sometimes. But yeah, timing is everything. And I think also it takes a while for books to actually settle in, especially when they're new. Usually a line of books, an imprint of regular books, is around for 4 or 5 years before it starts developing a following. So I think there were a number of reasons why it didn't work, but the books themselves, I think, were so creatively strong, and you know, were such a labor of love for everyone involved. So I'm particularly proud of that chapter in my working life.
You know, a lot of we're using the term mainstream, which usually in comics language means like sort of superhero comics, or Vertigo would be mainstream, correct?
I think only because we are a part of DC Entertainment, but I think that what we do is definitely, you know, we push boundaries. We're on the outside, I guess, of the mainstream thinking. And I just want to say that when we talk about character and we talk about strong female protagonists, it is the title of this forum. I think what's most important today is slaughtering stereotypes and building characters that are not just one-dimensional, unexpected story angles, character traits. I think that's how you really create interesting and original stories. And those are the kinds of books we do at Vertigo.
Let me ask you to segue right from that. When creating, editing female characters and works, do you all think consciously about the position role of the female characters in the text, and if so, how so? I mean, you already began to answer that question.
Sure.
I don't think about it consciously. I just write. I mean, they say to write what you know, so that means I should write about girls. But that doesn't mean I'll always write about girls. I think people have a range of emotions that we've all felt. So
Right. I think that the most compelling stories are personal stories. And that doesn't just mean, like Raina said, writing what you know, but it's writing what you believe in. And I think that at the end of the day, comic books are about amazing stories. And I think that when you can capture a reader's attention with words and pictures and leave an indelible mark on someone's life because of the story you told, that's exciting. And that's what I think making comics is all about.
I agree with you. I think very interesting that I agree with you. I've been in the privileged position of being able to write and draw, pencil, ink, everything. I've never had an editor tell me what to do. So it's a very, very personal thing when I draw comics. And when I was an editor, I pretty much just invited people whose work I admired and trusted and told them how many pages to do. I had very little actual editing to do. So it's coming from an entirely different place, but I agree exactly with what you said.
And I think there are all different styles and all different levels of editing. I think on certain projects, the best advice an editor gave to me, someone I looked up to many years ago, he said, sometimes the best thing you can do is step back. Because as a young editor, I would tend to want to put my fingerprints on every page, correct someone's perspective, maybe have somebody trim down the panel count, or maybe rip their prose to ribbons, which was fun, but not always for the writer. But I think some of the best advice I received back in the early days of my editing was, if it's working, take a big step back, because you need to let it work.
Do you all think we're in a privileged position then to be able to allow that sort of freedom? I mean, I'm getting a little bit of telling real stories with integrity coming from your heart and also, of course, your mind is enough to create idiosyncratic personas that happen to be female, perhaps. Do you think that, first of all, so I want to ask you, but I know you probably online you've seen those great images of like the guys wearing the female superhero costumes and so on. When you're drawing female characters, do you think consciously about the body image type and costume, or also does this sort of come naturally? And my bigger question, I guess, have things changed as you see it for women creators, editors, and publishers in comics since you began? Is it better now, or was it not even bad to begin with? But I guess the costume question's easier, or the clothes, or...
Well, I think that everything is evaluated in terms of the context. The Vertigo books are mature reader, so they're equivalent to R-rated movies. And I don't consider myself a feminist. I like a lot of provocative artwork and film and fiction. And when I'm trying to judge and evaluate a story, if there's nudity in it, I'd like to make sure that there's a pretty good reason in terms of the context of the story. I find in comics, it's much more interesting to me to see things in shadow, to let the reader come up with their own drawing in their own mind. But sometimes within the story, a character needs to be naked, and that's okay. But I always think it has to advance the character's motivation or advance the plot. Otherwise, it's gratuitous to me.
Or objectifying, right?
Exactly.
I still, every day we talk about,
Yes.
is this person being objectified? You recognize them for their mind and
Right.
their intelligence and who they are as a person, as well as, it's fine to do something sexy. It's
Right.
about the content. Right?
Exactly. And also, as someone who hasn't edited too many superhero comics, there's one thing that I'm always particular about, and it's the fashion and the styling, because I was always bothered by the fact that female superheroes always seem to run in heels. And platforms, I can understand. I wear them, I can run in them, but those stilettos drive me crazy.
There was another online site where somebody created women superhero costumes that would work, like sports bras and things like that. That were still like, kind of sexy, but at the same time not about objectifying and actually
Right.
very utilitarian. So.
Right.
But do you all want to respond to that in terms of like the female personas that you're creating, how they look, and also, or if you feel freedom in that, does it mean that we're in a space where we don't have to think too consciously about it, or?
There's a lot of different formats for comics than there were 50 years ago. I mean, now we can do periodicals, you can do webcomics, which have no constraints, graphic novels, which sometimes have a general page count ballpark that they're hitting, aiming for, but if a book of mine is 16 pages longer, we just add another signature. And people make mini comics. It's just, there's so much less to box us in now. As far as designing, realistic characters, I gravitate towards cartoony art, and I don't think cartoony equals realistic, but I'm depicting really realistic characters through cartoony art, if that makes any sense. And I want to see a lot of diversity, because that's the world around me, and I want to try to depict it realistically.
I think it's important to remember that there's words like satire, and that if I have a character who's wearing leopard skin miniskirts and go-go boots, it doesn't mean that I'm objectifying her. I'm having a comment on that type of woman, that type of society, the type of demand that if you draw a female superhero, she has to be sexy. There's context is what counts. And, it's fun to draw clothes and outfits with flowers on them and stuff, but that's not the point. The point is political commentary on what's actually happening in the world. And I don't think it's changed all that much. It doesn't sound like it to me. And I also don't understand why feminism seems to be a bad word. I think feminism I think it's weird if you're a woman and you're not a feminist, because it's just saying that who you are is as important as who anybody else is. And I know that a lot of you grew up when it didn't matter, When I went to a consciousness raising group in the 60s, and that was like I had to tell my husband I'm going, and are you going to talk about me? That kind of thing. So I think it really has come a long way, but I don't think that it's unimportant or irrelevant right now.
Your Dee Dee Glitz character actually reminds me a little bit of the Jennifer Lawrence character in American Hustle. And, because she's really glamorous and from Long Island and loves textures and colors and costumes, but she could kick butt when she wants to. And she also explores like LGBT issues and like really like she gets around, but it's because she wants to. I mean, it's like her desire and her agency that leads the way through all those narratives that I feel hopefully were really happening, of course, in your life growing up with your even your parents' generation, but maybe it wasn't exposed or written about enough during those times, perhaps.
Well, the underground culture was, breaking all the taboos you could. So there was a lot of sexual stuff and a lot of sort of parodies of romance comics with lots of sex and things like that, which was kind of fun. It's kind of shocking the first time that you have to draw that. It's like, oh my God, I'm drawing a penis.
Of course, the Spider-Man quote is, "With great power comes great responsibility." You mentioned this just a little bit too about like, I think comics are ultimately taking your reader on a wonderful journey. But you guys might have read the wonderful Scott McCloud Understanding Comics book where they talk about the power of the icon and suturing into that icon, becoming them and going on those roles. What role do you think creators and editors in comics in general have in terms of creating great role models for their readers, especially in regards to gender and identity politics, which could also include issues of race, LGBT issues, etc.? Do you ever, you're like, okay, I have to put on my like role-making cap, or?
I think I said a little bit earlier how important it is, I think, to represent the current zeitgeist. And now more than ever, it's acceptable to be different. And I'm always making sure that we are keeping our eyes on the pulse of political and social issues and being fair and representing as best as we can different ethnicities and different types of characters. I feel like as editors, it is our job to make sure that there's a balance. And again, you don't want to pigeonhole a certain person of a particular race into a story because you want to fill a quota. Because people do that with female characters, and I think that's wrong. I think there needs to be a really good story reason, but there should be really good stories that handle the subject matter, because that's what we want to do. We want to provide a diverse amount of genre fiction to the readers and really capture this wonderful time to be in comics. I really think that this is the greatest time. It's right now. It's the days that we're living to read comics, to make comics, to be a part of the comic scene. We've finally been accepted as a huge contributor to pop culture, and whether it's through The Walking Dead of the past few years, or whether it's through some gaming, or whether it's just through our graphic novels reaching the top of the New York Times bestseller lists, I think we have to just embrace it and continue to just be provocative and push boundaries and represent.
Yeah, I don't know if creating role models and the characters is my first goal, but I feel like as a person who's making comics for young people, my personal goal is just to show the weird kid in the back of the room that they're normal and that it's okay to be like you are, and that just means showing those weirdos in the stories, I guess.
Aletha, I have to ask you too, because you've drawn so many great like female superhero characters that really do kick butt in every way, and they're, you know, they look great, but also I look at their heads and their hair and their minds as much as I think anybody would look at their outfits. Do you think about that when you're drawing these characters, or?
Well, I think I have a slightly different perspective because I am in mainstream and I'm proud to be in mainstream.
Yeah.
And even though the side thing, my hobby is drawing my own on the side, but I look at that differently. I can say that I draw above the board the way they used to teach us to play D&D, because there is no reflection of me in my comic books. I'll pick elaborate scenes to draw, something like that. But as far as, walking into the room and being recognized as an artist, I am not, nor am I represented in most comics. Most of the time you do not see this, you do not see me, so I've learned, that's a learned behavior in myself, that I have not, I will not, and I don't think I will ever see an award. I'm not expecting one, but what I'm expecting is to have a long career, maybe, hopefully. But as far as picking up, what does this character have to, I don't know. I've never seen a reflection of myself, whether I was a child or now in a book. Never, not at all, because every character I draw, it's like another mask you put on over this face. Because how many people would look at me, I mean, all of you look at me, and think I'm a comic book artist. I entered the room, I got, are you here to clean up? We're not ready yet. How about the last con I went to, which I will be sitting to sign at the Eternal Con for the book I'm on WWE right now. But the promoter, when I met him, he doesn't realize he's met me, because he walked by me at a table like this, holding a business card, gave it to this girl, looked at me, held it, and walked on. There's no representing me. There's nothing. Right down to my last name. My name is Aletha Martinez. It is because my family is from, they're not Americans. I'm first generation here. Where's my reflection? There is none.
Don't you want to draw it?
Actually, no, I don't.
Why not?
Because I don't feel, I think my time for that is past. Someone else has to step up now. Someone needs to look and realize they can do it and become Rena, become someone else, but not, for myself.
What are the things you're drawing for yourself? You said that do those reflect you, or?
Actually, they don't. They more reflect the things that have influenced me than myself.
I would love to see your story as a comic.
I know, me too.
Yeah, I think
my
you should
goodness.
be writing your story. I can't think of a braver example of a strong female protagonist. You told such a brave story of how you got here that I think you should tell your story, and you should draw it too.
Yeah. Or provide us with a superhero. I love Phoenix. She's great, but more, right? Well, how do you guys think, I should keep saying guys, how do you think things can improve for women behind the scenes in the comic world? Do you think we are there yet in terms of gender equality? And if not, how would you like to see it go? Or where do you see it going or improving, and how? That's a big question, sorry.
I think we're getting there. I think we make tremendous strides. I mentioned that I was hired by 2 strong, talented female editors in the business. I was pretty lucky that they saw something in me, and I think we have to pay it forward. I think part of the reason that I wanted to come out and be a part of this panel was so that I could meet other people and talk to people and get them interested in comics. I think that comics have so much more to offer, because most people think, oh, if I can't write and I can't draw, how can I work in comics? Well, there are so many ways you can contribute. So I think it's really up to us, those of us in the industry, to continue to bring people together through teachers like you and through situations like this. I mean, the best advice I give to people that want to write and draw, I say, write 8 hours a day or draw 8 hours a day. Go to conventions, go to Artist Alley, talk to the writers and artists who have done what you are doing. There are people that would be happy to give you advice because they've been in your shoes. Practice and have patience and be proactive. When you meet editors, don't forget them. Drop them a note. And just reach out. You can't be shy if you really want to make it in the business. And get in print. Now more than ever, it is so easy to do an online comic. Go do your own mini comic. I remember picking up Rena's mini comics at Hanley's so many years ago, thinking how amazing she was and shocked that she was just a student. Same with Becky Cloonan. I hired her to do American Virgin, which was one of her big comic book jobs a number of years ago, based on the strength of her mini comics. So you can get discovered that way, but you really have to be on the ground. You have to really work it. You have to really do whatever you can to reach out and take advice from people who have been there, and don't give up if it's in your blood.
I always like, in the Olympics, they always wave their trophies in front of the TV and they say, don't give up. And like Aletha's story and your story, it's like you guys were like, you wanted to do this, you didn't give up. And DC also has had a long history of female editors. I mean, the death of Superman was brought about in a resurgence for DC by one of the heads of DC who was a woman, and Karen Berger, as you mentioned. And, yeah, so also, because I know we have to turn it to the crew here, I don't know if you guys wanted to remark about the idea of the gender gap. Is it closing? And also, very importantly, what advice do you have to give? 2 big questions that Shelley touched on, but...
I mean, as far as advice, I feel like being true to yourself is really important. I don't have to tell the people in this room, make mini comics and put stuff on the web, because you guys are already there. But if you don't think your work has a place, that's probably actually a really good thing, because you don't want to be the next so-and-so, and you don't want to be the person who draws like so-and-so. So do your thing and do it all the time. Like Shelley said, do it 8 hours a day if you have the time. Do it at night. I mean, we don't sleep. You guys know that, right?
I think they can see us. They can tell, at least if they're looking at this end of the table.
Yeah, it's not a job, it's a lifestyle, right?
Exactly.
It is, but we do it because we love it and we can't
Yeah.
do anything else.
Well, as you mentioned, there's so many more platforms now, especially with webcomics. You don't have to, I mean, the bittersweet thing of the stores closing is, one, they're interested in whatever is pushing out the door that's printed. If it sells, they love it. And so we're saying other mainstream, like, you know, Pantheon, Random House, Scholastic, those people are interested in graphic novels, obviously online too. And so you don't have to relegate yourself to one niche or another, and you could do all kinds of genres for everybody. And hopefully with, you know, Duchamp said, taste is created by habit. If more people have access to great content created by creators who care, no matter what their gender, orientation, and color, then hopefully other people can relate to that material, make more of it. And you know, the nice thing about capitalism is if capitalism creates a niche for something, we'll get more of it. You know, I love, you know, The Hunger Games, not the greatest movie in the series in the world or book series in the world, but we have strong female protagonists that aren't just female warriors gone rogue,
Right.
that they're humans, and these movies like that and Divergence making money, that hopefully we'll see more of it, maybe even female superhero movies one day.
Someday.
But do you guys also have advice or remarks about the state of things right now? Or
I agree with you that you have to be true to yourself. You have to draw the way you draw, and you have to draw what you want, and not think about the rest of it until you come to a point where you decide, yes, I want to submit something to an editor, or yes, I want to do my own online comic. Or my latest thing is I'm going, you know, instead of going online, I'm going back and I'm doing Didi in bas relief with word balloons. I've been sculpting a long time, and I have a sculpting studio, and so now I've decided to join my comics to my sculpting, and it's some kind of, you know, it's like I'm doing a triptych for a temple, but it's very exciting.
and crossing the lines too between supposed high and low, fine art meets comics. I think it's such an important arena to talk about and discuss now, and it's growing ever more. So, and Aletha, you said write every day. Is that what you're meant? What
Well, one of my favorite Spider-Man quotes is that you have to have a strong focus on what you want. You draw every day. You draw whether you're sick or well, and you plan to draw till the end. You know, just is what you do. And as far as those aiming for that mainstream, it's not as wide open a market as doing your own. There's only so many books in every company, and you've got so many people competing for those so few spots. So you have to really focus on what you want. If you're going for an X book, you have to do that teen book. You have to show them that you can do that. You have to show them that you can handle that work. You know, you can't bring, you know, it's cute. I can't bring Yumi and Ever to an X-Men. Like, it just can't work. It won't work. So you have to have that focus, and you have to channel that focus into showing them that you can do this, and for that title you're going to present for. Other than that, you know, just if you're doing it yourself, that's fine. But if you're going for that 1%, you've got to really be focused.
And hit your deadline.
Yes.
Well, that's harder.
That's key.
Speaking of deadlines, I'm over my deadline to open up the floor for Q&A, so I think this is a good time to segue.
Girls are not just sugar and spice and everything nice in my experience.
I agree. I am absolutely into anti-heroes, and I think that we definitely need to be equal opportunity in terms of villains, for sure. I'm with you.
Now, didn't you see that new 300? She sent that man home without his skirt on. That was a shame. She told him to get out, carry the skirt in hand.
You know
Come
what
on.
it is? She's doing soft on me, and I'm like, no.
Yes, she did. She fell down in
She
the
got
end.
soft on me. I
She got a
can't
little,
tell she
yeah,
got
you know. Yeah, it's fine though. But I liked her up to that point.
I haven't. I actually feel that as Vertigo as a line, has been really fair in representing all different types of characters. And I do think that you're right, though. I think sort of the age of the internet and social media of the past maybe 8, 9 years it gives everyone a platform, and everyone thinks that they have a right to say what they want to say because there's no accountability. And I think it's rather sad. I really feel like to each his own. You know, we produce a wide variety of comics, and I feel like there's something for everyone. So if one comic doesn't appeal or offends, hopefully there's something else that'll be of interest.
My weirdest fan is the dude who can't deal with reading about girls, but likes my work and wants to explain that to me, as if like somehow it's my job to validate that he's like identifying with a girl. And to that I say, dudes, you gotta grow up. Embrace your inner feminist. Embrace your inner 12-year-old girl.
Well, I think my son is Raina's biggest fan. He's a 10-year-old boy, and he just thinks Smile and Drama are the coolest books. And he also plays electric guitar.
Go
so
Spencer.
He's a dude, but he likes reading about girls.
These are usually men over 30 that,
Oh, okay.
that I get this from.
All right.
So it's
I was just trying to be equal opportunity. I
think
didn't
the
want
next generation
I
has
wanted.
it
I
also.
wanted to represent the gender gap.
It's totally
so
cool.
I just thought it was worthwhile bragging about that fact.
We shout out to the gay characters too in drama that are very like interestingly, very realistically.
Absolutely.
Oh, I've heard so much. Well, Amazon reviews would have you believe that I've done a disservice to the gay community by like having characters who represent my friends, but they're wrong. Don't read Amazon reviews. That's my advice. I mean, making comics is the only advice I can give to kids that want to do it. So if you can just somehow encourage them to keep doing it, possibly offer yourself up as somebody who you're not going to end your relationship with them when they leave your class. You know, say you're always welcome to come back to me for critiques or to discuss, you know, things that you like. Just being there for them.
I always recommend life drawing.
Yeah.
Get kids out of the classroom and go sit in a park or go sit on the subway and make sure every day in their sketchbook they do a figure drawing, because sometimes I think people get boxed in by the panels, and I don't mean that in a funny way. It's really important to keep up with the life drawing when you're an artist. Well, like I said earlier, I think if you haven't been published before, be realistic. Probably be really a long shot for it to be picked up by one of the major publishers. So what I would recommend is look for the small companies, consider doing a Kickstarter. I know a lot of people have had success with that. Go to MoCA next weekend and talk to some people who have actually put together indie comic books. Because putting out a graphic novel is so expensive, and we don't do as many as we used to for that very reason. It's so costly. It has to be a really special story, and it is so rare for it to be the first story that someone ever brought to us. So my advice really is to go to the conventions, get advice from people who are writing and drawing, and really go out there and go through small press or even consider publishing as a webcomic first, just so you can kind of get an audience and get some feedback.
Thank you. Anyone else on the panel?
I think I agree with Shelley's advice, putting it up on the web and then possibly printing like a 40-page first chapter that you can then sell to people or give to people, and then it's like read the rest of the story online. And that, like Shelley said, also just being able to prove that you know how print works and can sort of format your work for print goes a long way into convincing editors that they should take a chance on you in the future.
Well, I think you create your own destiny, and I think regardless of your gender, I think if you want something, you just have to go for it. You have to make yourself irreplaceable. You have to be there on time. You have to do what it takes. And if people that want to get into editorial, there are internships with some of the larger companies, sometimes temp jobs. There are ways to volunteer at conventions to find out the inner workings. So I think there are so many different ways to make it happen for yourself. But I think that there's definitely that fine line. You don't want to bug people. You don't want to just suddenly appear. But I think it's important to cultivate relationships with people in the business. And you certainly, by talking to some of your teachers, I think they can probably point you in the right direction and maybe even get you some time to speak with editors or other professionals in the business to, again, pay it forward. We've all been there, especially those of us who have been so lucky to be a part of the comic scene for over 20 years. And I think we're always trying to find new ways to bring people in.
I mean, being in the right place at the right time sometimes just means like sticking around after the thing is over and like talking to people and having a business card in your pocket and just, you're here tonight. That to me is like the first step. It's like you're here, you're at this panel. There's all these other people in this room who work in the industry and are interested in the industry. And so talk to some people, talk to the person sitting next to you.
And a compliment goes a long way.
Yes.
I find that there are people that run to track me down and then they have absolutely no idea what I've edited. And I've probably edited 5,000 comic books. So, you know, it'd be good to do a little research. I'm always surprised when people take so much time to find me and then suddenly they don't realize that I edit Fables. Like, wow, that's a huge part of my life. So I think when you finally do get to talk to people, do your homework, because a little bit of knowledge goes a long way in making us remember you for the time when a position might be available.
I think Harvey Kurtzman was a genius, and he influenced probably anybody who became a cartoonist. Maybe some of them didn't realize it, but I'm not quite sure what your question is that you want to ask.
Oh, no, I was curious because you worked in underground. A lot of them said that he was a main influence to them. Robert Crumb, Art Spiegelman. I just wanted to know, like, what you thought of his work.
Robert Crumb and Art Spiegelman and Bill Griffith and Justin Green and Aileen Crumb and Spain Rodriguez and Gilbert Shelton. There was a whole comic scene, and I think we supported each other. And when a comic book came out, we'd have a big party. You know, it was very loose and fun. There wasn't a lot of getting into the business. It was part of the 60s where people didn't give a shit about that stuff. So I think that there was every kind of underground. I mean, there was Greg Irons and Spain, and there were a lot of people that were influenced by reacting to comics that were horror comics or EC, and I think I learned by doing it, you know, and I was encouraged by just being around, and it was easy to get in print, and it was a very good time to be a young cartoonist.
Well, the first rule of thumb is hiring an amazing writer. And Bill Willingham is the creator and writer of Fables, and it was really all his genius idea. He's someone who I actually met in my early days in comics at Comico, and he was one of those writers who didn't write very often. So I spent most of my time chasing him around the country to get him to turn in his scripts. So finally, when I came to DC, I knew I wanted him to do a comic for me again, and he pitched me Fables. He pitched it to me, and he didn't even think it was a Vertigo book. And I told him I absolutely had to edit that book because it was so brilliant. So it basically, I guess it's more of a, I'm not really answering your question, but I think the main concept behind Fables, which is fairy tale characters living in the 21st century with all of the trials and tribulations of the modern world, I think he set himself up for just such a rich mythology and an interesting, unique world to live in and build upon. And I think what he always had a way with female characters since he started writing comics. So I think he was the perfect person to take so many different stereotypes. We think of Snow White and Cinderella as very particular types of of female characters, and he just, turned them on their heads, did something unexpected. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think basically when you have a creator who comes to you with this incredible idea, you just encourage them to keep building on it, and it's really his talent and his respect for women, I think, that has allowed him to build and create such amazing female characters.
Any appearance is fine. It doesn't have to, there's no limitations there. I mean, writing female characters is like writing any kind of characters. I mean, good characters, they all want something. They all have flaws.
And secrets.
They all interact with the world differently, and so it just depends at what the world's throwing at them and how they respond.
I think it's good to create weak female characters in addition to the strong ones. I mean, you create a world. You don't just have one character. You have a whole spectrum. And it's much more interesting, realistic, and fun to have all different kinds, devious and weak, and just lots of different character traits in men and women.
And it's nice when a character is both of those things, both strong and weak, because that makes them even more interesting.
And also in that screenwriting class I spoke about when I first discovered comics, the very first thing I was taught was action is character. What you put your characters through is critical. And the journey of a weak character to becoming a strong character can be interesting, and it doesn't have to be something you've heard before. And that's why I always stress the unexpected twists and turns, what makes your character tick, both what they're thinking about, what they have hidden in their pocket, the things that happen to them that scar them visually or even inside. All of those things, when you're building a character, you need to think about so that you're creating something that's riveting and memorable.
Good. And, lastly, I want to ask you guys, these are great questions. I always think that zeitgeists happen when like-minded individuals gather their forces together and take on the world, and truly all art movements have happened that way, including the underground comics movement, including like the SVA 2000 Millennium, the editors at DC, everything that Aletha is participating in. Do you guys know the Bechtel test? By Alison Bechtel, the great cartoonist, who's also going to be at MoCA this weekend. One, it has to have 2 women in it who are named, 2 who talk to each other, 3 about something besides a man. I was wondering if some of this is about capitalism, and that we need to support comics that are doing things that could pass the Bechtel test. Do you have any recommendations of people we should be reading who we might not be reading right now, or titles to seek out by any gender?
I would definitely recommend the Fairest arc, The Hidden Kingdom, which is written by Lauren Bucas and drawn by Iñaki Miranda. Lauren Bucas is this incredible South African writer. And one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet, but I think one of the ways that we can continue to represent females in comics is to reach out to writers from different countries who have different experiences, because I think they bring so much to the table in terms of comic book storytelling, which is one of the reasons why I recommend Lauren's work. She did an incredible job. Her character for Fairest was Rapunzel, and she just really blew my mind with her Japanese mythology and just the choreography she put her character through. So that's one that I would highly recommend.
And anybody, in fact, I would love if each of you had a recommendation. That would just be neat. But
I always recommend the work of Faith Erin Hicks, who's mostly publishing with First Second right now, and she's done a book called Friends with Boys. She did one called Nothing Can Possibly Go Wrong. Her earlier work was published by, oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on the name of the publisher.
I think it was called Zombies Calling.
Zombies Calling.
Yeah, she was also
one called
someone,
The War at Ellesmere.
Yeah, she is incredible. I also met her many years ago. She was supposed to do a Minx book for me before the line ended, so I highly recommend her work as well. She's not only a great illustrator, but she's a great writer.
Yeah. And she's one of the few people who's doing comics that you can really classify as YA right now that are hitting their mark.
Yeah.
I recommend that you look into the history of comics and explore the underground artists, because I think that in terms of personal comics, those of you who are interested in doing personal comics or indie comics, you'll find a lot of inspiration and information there. And also want to mention that Alison Bechdel was first published in Women's Comics.
And you all might not know at SVA in the library, if you're an SVA student, you have access to this incredible underground comics resource that's online. We have all access to so many amazing titles that are really hard to find. And Aletha, any recommendations?
Yeah, well, what I do is I pick something that I've never read before, never seen before, or something extremely popular and try to figure out why. So it's not one thing, it's pick something that you've never read before. Not anything, just go away. I just finished reading the Twilight Saga. I sat down and read the whole thing. It's like, yeah, why would you read that? Well, you know, that woman sold a lot of books and she's sitting quite pretty right now and I need to know why. What the hell? You know, I want some of that myself. Come on, so I don't have to work so hard. But, you know, I just pick something I've never done before. Just stretch, because you'll learn something. If I can learn something even from her, the style of her writing was very, very different. Just, you know, what made this so popular? And I tell you, it wasn't those two people on the screen. It definitely wasn't.
I also want to give a shout out to this book, The Pretty in Ink book by Trina Robbins, who was a colleague of Diane's. And as we're talking, you know, the history of women in comics is really as old as comics itself. And this is just one of the many her story books of women in comics I absolutely recommend.
I wanted to say one thing about that. I'm probably not in it.
No, you are. You're definitely in it. Not only are you in it, but your images are in it. And I know there are a lot of politics and so on, but no, she pays her deep respects, as do I all for you all to be here and to share with us all your stories. I do think that, and your advice and your recommendations and your talent and your intelligence and this conversation, I do feel like we are in a better place probably than we've ever been in the history of comics in general. I think SVA is one of the best, I mean, I'm biased of course, but I think it is one of the best comic schools in the world.
Here,
and
here.
I think in the 17 or whatever years I've been here, it's probably the best it is right now, although we miss our alumni. But it continues just to grow and get better and better and better. And I hope that you all continue to support the comics that you love by reading them, buying them, and let the creators and the publishers know how much you love them, because that is super important. And for those of you guys, many of whom are creators, I hope you just keep writing and drawing and making your comics, never giving up and getting out there into the world, because truly that's how things change and evolve. We've been seeing that just in the last decade or two, how much they've evolved. I think you all are a great part of that evolvement. Really, we have students who come here now because they are influenced by what it is that you people do. And I just continue seeing the world getting even better. So thank you guys so much for your patience and your time.